Bonjour à tous. Merci au
Good
Forum
afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Paris Peace Forum for organizing this session of discussions on the challenges and perspectives for development finance. Thank you for being here today. My name is Shanti Bobin from the Multilateral Financial Affairs and Development from the Ministry of the Economy.
Throughout the session, and you have a translation available. From Addis Ababa 10 years ago to Sevilla a few months ago, 4 words are crucial when it comes to development finance: public, private, domestic, international. So how to mobilize and catalyze finance to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and how to do that also to end poverty on a livable planet. I will ask you to keep your answer. I will ask our speakers around this table to keep their answer very short, 2 minutes, and focus, for example, on the main challenge you see, your favorite solution. We are also very much interested in what you think of the TOSSD. So, you know, we love acronym in the bureaucratic world. I'm part of a bureaucratic world. So we love new acronyms, new ideas, new concepts, like the Total Official Support for Sustainable Development. And if you have an opinion on that, we will also be very happy to have your point of view. Et sans plus tarder maintenant, pour commencer, je vais passer
Without further much ado, I'm giving the floor to Benoît Lerosier from the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. You have the floor. Thank you, Shanti. Thank you to all our guests and to the public for being present here. I will be very short so that we can focus on the ideas and collective thinking around the table.
Just a few words to kickstart the discussion. You mentioned both the challenges ahead and how we can see the way forward for the future of finance for development. So I will stick to that. When it comes to challenges, I will maybe mention very briefly 3 of them that I think we can maybe build on our analysis. The first one is the growing questioning, if not crisis, of existing multilateral fora and structures, if not of multilateralism as a whole. The second one is, and probably the most salient at the moment, is the growing financing gap between the available public resource, in particular in among traditional donors, and the growing financing needs throughout the world in terms of meeting SDGs and responding to various international crises, be it security crisis or other crises, in particular health crisis. And the third challenge I would like to mention, which is obviously a consequence of the 2 first ones I mentioned, is a growing questioning of the existing structures of official development assistance, both from the north, from donor countries, but also more globally, in particular when it comes to representativity of those of that model. I think those challenges are part of what led us to the Seville discussion a few months ago that you mentioned, Shanti, and to more broadly our own reflection of how to take this fight forward. So at national level, we are in the process of a deep reform of our approach to international development assistance with a focus on solidarity, investment, and a more strategic approach to the partnerships, the political partnerships on which our assistance is built. But that's also something we have been keen to take forward in international fora. So you mentioned our input to the Seville discussion. It's also at the core of the 4P, the Pact for People, the Planet, Prosperity on the Planet, to foster dialogue and inclusivity and representativity in the global dialogue on international assistance, and also of a series of ongoing discussions and reforms in the various fora, including the OECD DAC, and just to conclude and leave the floor to the discussion, we are pretty much looking forward at 2026 next year, which will be extremely important, if not crucial, to take forward this discussion in all this fora, and also towards the discussions in the G7 next year. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Benoît.
Thank you very much, Benoît. Now, I said that we have a new concept, and this concept is TESSD.
A new acronym, somehow new at the very beginning of the discussion. So I wanted to ask Julia Ben from the International Secretariat of TESSD. Can you tell us in a nutshell what is TESSD?
Thank you. So TOSD, we usually say, it was created to capture in a single comprehensive framework all development finance resources from all providers, covering all instruments, so both concessional, non-concessional, blended finance, etc., and all frameworks of collaboration, including South-South and triangular cooperation. It captures all official and officially supported cross-border flows to developing countries and private finance mobilized by official interventions, and then as a separate component, contributions to international public goods and development enablers. So based on our work and experience in developing the TOSD framework, so I would like to raise three main points for discussion today. The first one is simply to say that measurement matters. It sets incentives to provide resources, and it influences behaviors. Second, what matters even more is the decision-making behind the measurement. So for a measurement framework to be considered as legitimate at the international or global level, an inclusive and balanced governance is needed. And the International Forum on TOSD is an example of how this can work. Developing countries are not members of the International Forum TOSD just to legitimize it, but actually to influence and fully participate in the decision-making. And then my third point would be to say that mobilizing resources from all sources, private, public, domestic, and international, I mean, it really requires a shift in the narrative of development support, something that really acknowledges the specific needs of developing countries, but that also reflects the urgency of tackling global challenges. And to succeed, this narrative must be co-created with developing countries. So I reckon such a shift, it will not be welcomed if it is not accompanied by transformational changes in the governance, decision-making, and working methods. And I would finish by saying that last week, so the International Forum TOSD, we had our annual meeting in Madrid, hosted by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I really left that meeting energized and inspired. And there we discussed, for example, how TOSD can evolve to support the full implementation of the Compromiso de Sevilla. One important aspect there being the mobilization of private finance. And there in TOSD we have been working to provide this more comprehensive data on these flows. We are keen to pursue the work, and we see its transformational potential. But we need really a thorough discussion on what mobilized private finance means from the developing countries' perspective. We need to be able to demonstrate the development impact at the country level, and this is the area where we hope to be able to contribute also in future from the International Forum on TOSD. Thank you so much, Shanti.
Thank you very much, Julia. Now I would like to turn to our speakers from civil society, and I would like to give the floor to Sarah Pantuliano, the Chief Executive of ODA Global. And Sarah, you have a long-lasting or great experience, especially in peace building, in development, humanitarian affairs, and also in what we call FCV countries, if I may say so, fragile conflict-affected countries. So please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Shanti. I wasn't actually planning to touch on that. I was sticking to what you asked me to do, to talk about a challenge and a solution, or maybe three parts of a solution. And I think for me, the key challenge, which in a way relates also to the importance for fragile and conflict-affected context, is the fact that the OECD projects another 9 to 17% cuts in order for the next year, in addition to the decline of 9% of last year. And so as we continue to transition to a lower quantum of other spending, ensuring the integrity of other, for me, is absolutely critical, which means that every concessional dollar or euro must be strategic, transparent, and really focused on protecting the most vulnerable, including in fragile and conflict-affected states. We started a year and a half ago a series of conversations at ODI called Donors in a Post-Aid World. In a way, we were pre-signed, we could see the trends, and we really organized this platform to make sure that donors could come together, particularly bilaterals, to think about evolving narratives for development cooperation, new ways to allocate increasingly scarce concessional public finance. And through these conversations, I think it's become quite clear that over the last year, despite all the challenges, we've seen an improvement in the effectiveness and efficiency of MDBs, both individually and as a system. But, and this is the first of my three sort of parts to a solution, I think the elephant in the room is that we need to ensure that borrowing countries have a much stronger voice and meaningful representation in the governance structures of these institutions. If we want these efforts to reform the MDBs to really succeed, we need to make sure that the perspective of their client countries are really meaningfully embedded in their strategies and priorities. The second point has emerged from a survey that we do every 3 years, where we kind of poll 500 senior officials of Ministry of Finance and Treasury departments of low and middle income countries, and the results have just been released, is really the importance of improving the coordination and collaborations between MDBs, national development banks, bilateral donors, and DFIs in country, at country level, but throughout the project cycle. Diagnostic, project preparations, co-financing, mutual recognition are absolutely critical. The survey showed that nearly half of government respondents feel that these institutions are starting to coordinate better in countries, but there is still a lot of room to minimize transaction costs and maximize impact. And third, and it's my last point, and it's also related to TOSDE, is not all about money. We need to look a lot harder at the broader structural change. So issues around trade, around intellectual property, around technology transfer. We continue to transfer obsolete technology to low and middle income countries. The financing of the UN and the broader multilateral system, they all need to be in the policy mix. So the theme is rethinking development finance. Well, for me, the question is not just about how much money we raise, but it's how we make it count, how we share power, and how we really make sure that we serve the people that these systems are meant to support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your very inspiring words. Perhaps I will take from what you said that what matters is not only money, but impact, and we have to coordinate better between actors. So that's why I would like now to give the floor to Khaled Igné, co-président de la Fondation French African Foundation, sorry. And perhaps, Khaled, you can also tell us about how we make this partnership between private and public sector, among others.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, je vais m'exprimer en
Thank you very much. I will be speaking French. And today, development finance is at a turning point. On one side, we have unprecedented need. Africa needs 1.2 trillion every year for the next 10 years. And we have this paradox because the continent of Africa needs this money to develop, and the money exists, but the money is not going in the right direction. That's the impression that we have. And today we have three main things to say. First thing is that the existing systems are not adapted. The mechanism to fund development are based on 20th century logics, rigid conditions, very high costs for African countries, and a global financial architecture that promotes debt. And second fact, fragmentation between the development bank, the green funds, the sovereign funds, and the private sector. There is too few coordination at the moment, which reduces impact. The countries are creating files and answering calls and not creating projects. Third fact, it's the reduced mobilization of local capital. The local needs are not used, and the local actors could play a better role, but do not have guarantees, incitation, and regulation framework. And I would like to offer 4 levers to rethink development financing. First lever is to reinvent the public-private partnership for development, not only creating infrastructure, but economic systems. Second lever, it is the mobilization of African capital markets. We need to free domestic markets through green bonds. Third level, to transfer the MDBs into investment. The African Development Bank and the sovereign funds have to be levers to attract private capital. And third point is to digitalize and green and make development finance greener with blockchain and AI. And this shouldn't be a question of aid or dependency. It should become a tool for economic sovereignty, for structural change and fair share. And it's by renewing our alliance and priority that we can create a true development finance for the people. Thank you, Khaled. And I think that you gave us the possibility to have a good transition to the next speaker. I would like to give the floor to Bruno Cabriac. Bruno Cabriac from Ferdi, that has a lot of experience. And Bruno, I've heard a few words that might be important and be similar to what you do: vulnerability, allocation, and also local finance and mobilization of capital markets. Thank you very much, Chanty, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. As you said, I will be focusing on 2 main points. The first point is allocation. We've talked about mobilization a lot, but not a lot about allocation. And it's true that the challenge that we have for ODA at the moment is to do more or as good with less money. And there's a lot of ways to improve impact, but there's a very easy way is to allocate more to the most vulnerable countries. It's to do more compared to our commitments, because the commitments at the international level usually mention vulnerable countries as the main beneficiaries. And also research shows that development assistance is more efficient in more vulnerable countries because it allows them to be more resilient. So how might you do this? Well, I think that there are 2 main elements to consider and that are easy to implement. First, have clearer objectives. Today, with all the SDGs, there are many different objectives, public common goods, climate, etc. And so it's not necessarily you don't have necessarily things that are related to SDGs. And when you look at what is ODA within the DAC, you see that the climate funds are given usually to middle-income countries, and it's classified as ODA. So having clearer objectives is a way to have more responsibility and better mobilization and allocation of funding. And TOSD and the new measurement tools will also help this. And we also have to take into account the vulnerability indicators in allocation, not to have a list of priority countries, or not only to have a list of priority countries, but also to decide on the amount that you allocate to each country. And another point that I would like to briefly present to come back to echo what Kaladige said, we were talking about mobilization and domestic resources and about taxing, but it's also very important to mobilize more the economy, the household sparings. In Sub-Saharan Africa, you have 50% of economies in the countries, and so that's a good level, and this could be used, but it's not well used at the moment. Why is it not sufficient, these savings? It's not, the interests are not very good. These savings are within banks, and it is something that is known for a long time. The interests are not very good on those savings. There's also a lot of liquidity of the banking sector, and they don't use the household savings, and they mainly fund the state in poorer countries through direct obligations, direct bonds, or through other ways. And so they don't fund investment. And so the solution that exists is to have a better financial sector, a deeper financial sector. It takes a lot of time, and maybe in countries in the global north, we don't give enough money for this. And maybe there could be other solutions for mobilization of private savings, household savings, to give it better interest and surer interest, and also to buy force. So in order to fund the state, those are systems that exist in France, for example, but it should also be used, or we should also force the bank to work more and mobilize their revenues and private savings for investment. And if you look, for example, at the macroeconomic statistics of the debt of the private sector in sub-Saharan Africa, the private sector is not indebted at all. In South Africa, for example, the debt level is at 8% of GDP. Why? And it's the one that has the most developed financial sector. Why is the debt of the private sector so low? Because there's no loans, and the banks are not loaning, and that's a problem, and there are capacity for funding of the economy that exists there for investment, and it's not used. Thank you very much, Bruno. We often talk about debt and public debt and sovereign debt, but you have to look at all the parts of the system, and mobilizing local financing. It's also funding the private sector, and that's very important what you said. You talked about Africa, and I would like to move to another continent, to Latin America, and I would like to give the floor to Maria Fernanda Espinosa
of Ecuador. She's also Executive Director for GWL Voices for Change and Inclusion. And among others, can you give us a voice from Latin America, if I may say so, and also, well, above all, from your huge experience, please?
Well, thank you, moderator. You mentioned two key words. One is about the challenges, and the second about our favorite solutions. But speaking about the challenges, if we look at what is the sustainable development financing gap and the $6.4 trillion that we need, and basically what we hear is that we need to pull the resources from everywhere. Domestic resource mobilization, the local, the private, blended finance, and all the formulas we already know. But in basically shrinking and almost disappearing ODA, I mean, this 20% decrease only in 2025, it's not only an issue of that we see lack of resources, but I see this as a crisis of solidarity and as a crisis of international cooperation. And my second comment is that this crisis of solidarity and cooperation is due to a change in priorities. And I think that basically we really need to come to grips to looking at prevention at the best investment. Prevention in all fronts, prevention of conflict, prevention of massive human displacement, prevention of the freedom from fear and freedom from want that we all work for. The number two issue that several of the speakers have mentioned is the issue of governance. We continue to discuss about the need to transform the international financial architecture, but this is a very complex field. It has to be comprehensive. It has to bring not only the multilateral development banks, but the regional entities, the national development banks. Is a whole architecture that needs to look at not only resilience, adaptation, and prevention, but also at issues of inequalities and social cohesion. I come from a region, the most violent region in the world, unfortunately, Latin America and the Caribbean, and the most unequal after sub-Saharan Africa. So these issues have to come into play. And also the issue of changing the narrative, how we define risk, because we talk about de-risking, how we define risk in terms of the cost of inaction. I think it's very important. But also how is that we value the invisible. And let me give you two examples. Care work is to properly value the millions of dollars that are undervalued because of unpaid care work, 80% of which is done by women, and ecosystem services in the proper way. Let me give you an example. Ecosystem services, for example, the services provided by biodiversity and water. Water needs to come also to play in national accounting. There are several exercises already in play. And when you look, what is my favorite solution? My favorite solution is more cooperation, more multilateralism, and not less. And one excellent example is the Compromiso de Sevilla itself. I think it's a very powerful product of when we work together and of collective action in motion. But of course here, the challenge is the challenge of implementation. And we need a societal tracking system and monitoring to look at what is going to happen with the 130 initiatives that came out of the Sevilla process and that are embedded in Compromiso de Sevilla. Concrete examples and innovations are countless. In my own region, you know, for example, the debt for nature swaps in Ecuador, the issuing of green bonds. There are lots of innovations out there that we need to bring in. And just perhaps to close, when we talk about changes in governance, I think it's not only about decision-making in multilateral banks, it is also addressing the complex issues, the issue of a comprehensive debt restructuring mechanism, especially for middle-income countries like my own Ecuador, but also addressing the issue of illicit financial flows. So this is a very complex package, but I think it's not impossible. We need to work from all fronts, and collective action means the coming together of all sectors in society, not only governments, but civil society, the private sector, academia. And I had a few thoughts about the TOSSD, not only an acronym, but I think, but perhaps this is an initial tool that is very powerful, that has great potential, but where we need to make visible the invisible. And I had a few comments, but perhaps no more time. My time is up, and thank you again. Over to the moderator.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. You said two things, more cooperation, more multilateralism. So now I will turn to the OECD and to Mary-Beth Goodman. I think this also defines the OECD. It's great. I've also took note of measurement matters, implementation matters, standard setting matters. So over to you, Mary-Beth.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity that we're trying to think through these big challenges at such a complex time in the world. The global economy is moving, holding together, but it's slowing. We know we have inflation going up. We know we've got financial fragility that is becoming more persistent. And when all that happens, it's the fiscal space that starts to suffer first. And when that starts to suffer, we see less money going for development assistance. We know that development cooperation is facing a strain. That is probably one of the biggest understatements you will hear, given that we've just this year seen the collapse of USAID. The drop in US funding there has been quite significant, but it is not just the United States that is cutting official development assistance. This is a much broader issue. At the OECD, we've been looking to do some projections. Normally, we do retroactive work on our official development assistance numbers through our Development Assistance Committee. But this year, given the seismic change, we have done some projections. And this is not an easy time, right? Last year, as we heard our colleague from ODI say, we saw a 9% drop in official development assistance. 2024. 2025 is going to see probably between 17 and 20% drop again when all is told. That's really significant. And most importantly, we're seeing the LDCs suffer the most. We think it will amount to another 25% drop in assistance for the LDCs, and that's probably going to be about a 30% drop in sub-Saharan Africa. Every sector is being impacted. Humanitarian is the hardest hit, right? The size of the needs is the greatest with Sudan and Gaza and all the things going on. Humanitarian sector is being the hardest hit. Democracy and support for democratic civil society, all these things that fall under that category, is the second biggest hit, which I don't know that we're paying enough attention to yet, but we need these civil society activists and we need to support democracy on the ground. Health is the third biggest hit, followed by education in terms of sectors. So it is not simply one region, it is not simply one sector. And so what does that mean for us? It means that we have got to figure out a way to rethink and reimagine development assistance and the development sector as a whole, right? It's also a test of political will, right? We have to make sure that some of this work will continue, and it is not going to be able to be done through public budgets alone. There is no way public budgets are going to meet the growing demands that we see around the world. So that means we have to rethink development finance itself, and how we measure it and how we govern it are the two key principles that I think we really need as a community to think through. In Sevilla, we all sweltered through the heat in Sevilla. Spain was gracious in hosting. We got a Sevilla commitment, which frankly the world needed. We needed a win, and we got it. And now we have to implement it, and that's the hard part, right? A 10-year agenda to think about how we implement this, but the focus coming out of the entirety of the Sevilla commitment is really clear. We have to move beyond traditional aid and move towards a broader vision of what solidarity-based and sustainable investment means for these countries. I'm going to offer 3 areas to think about. 1, we have to strengthen domestic resource mobilization. This has been said so many times in the sector, but we actually have to do it, right? This is a new commitment that had greater language and greater thought put behind it in the Sevilla commitment. At the OECD, we're working through this through some of the tax measures, particularly the Tax Inspectors Without Borders that we do with UNDP, but also through some of the more practical global inclusive frameworks. But DRM is going to be the backbone for what many countries are going to have to rely on to backfill the cuts in international aid, but also to plan for their future in a more comprehensive way. Secondly, mobilizing private finance. At the OECD, we have just released new blended finance guidance through the Development Assistance Committee. We know we need to look at better data, deeper capital markets, as we've heard from others, and innovative tools. And whether those are the debt for nature swaps, the climate swaps, whatever it is, we need some of these new tools, and we need climate resilient debt clauses included in these instruments. Third issue, rethinking cooperation for impact. What is the role of official development assistance? What are we doing to improve the quality and the use of data? How are we thinking about country transitions when they move from one economic dimension to another? What's the role of the private sector? How are we looking at the collaboration with philanthropy, foundations, and how are we rethinking the collective use of all this for impact on the ground? That is so critical to think about. All of this, I'm going to bring it back to TOSTI. My colleague Julia, we are proud to host TOSTI at the OECD. And TOSTI is a really new and unique tool that I don't think enough people fully understand and know enough about yet. TOSTI is looking to provide the fuller picture of international support. Trying to capture. If you can perhaps. Oh, sorry, I can't see the clock. Yes. Trying to capture the South-South cooperation, the non-concessional and the private flows, and investments in public goods like health and climate. Bringing this entire picture together is what we need to do as a community, but also to help these countries be able to really maximize their potential for impact as well. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Actually, I had planned to have time for questions, but perhaps we will have less time for questions than what was planned. But I think we have quite interesting interventions. Well, to me, at least. Je voudrais maintenant passer la parole.
Now, I'd like to give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Moussa Faki, Special Envoy of the Pact for Prosperity of People and Planet. And to carry along the same lines, I heard a lot about the importance, how important it is to go beyond divisions, to reinvent things and to see things differently. Mr. Moussa Faki, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame. Mesdames et Messieurs, chers amis.
Thank you, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we're going through difficult times. I mean, that's an understatement, of course. These times have been marred by increasing challenges and a widening array of increasing challenges. I mean, this is widely accepted, even if there's a minority who says it's not true. But anyway, there's a decline in multilateralism, both publicly, politically and diplomatically, and in trade. There's a drop in public aid to development and official development aid. Some have even mentioned there is a fatigue for official development aid, and there's an increasing weight and the increasing burden for some countries of their debt. And of course, global warming and extreme climatic events like in Jamaica and Cuba are just an example thereof. So, ladies and gentlemen, the urgency and the fact that they are permanent, these challenges, requires us to find solutions to act. That's why in 2023, after the conference dedicated to reforming global financial governance, we set up a pact for prosperity for people on the planet. And this platform, which was set up in Paris, has more than 70 member countries. Countries from the Southern Hemisphere, the Northern Hemisphere, countries that are part of the OECD, Africa, Latin America, you name it. And these 70 countries work hand in hand to meet the challenges. In this respect, this is how we started. We started to organize things by coalitions. I'm going to mention 2 or 3 of the existing coalitions, namely one, which was set up on vulnerability and financial concessions with a roadmap on integrating multi-dimensional vulnerabilities, because there's more to it than just the GDP. A second coalition is dedicated to financing and solidarity taxing. We thought about taxing premium flyers, for example, airline tickets, business or first-class tickets. Third pillar. Debt now, debt management. There's a real need to associate debt to nature and climate to have a more holistic vision of the problem. And lastly, mobilizing private funds. We know that public funds are not sufficient to cover the needs, and there are obstacles to overcome, namely regulations and prudential regulation. This is what discourages investors to invest in developing countries. When you see the ratings of all of these states, I mean, sometimes, how could I put it? Well, indistinctively rated, this will not allow investors to move forward as long as the regulations are not changed. So, no ODA, no investments, then what? So these coalitions are trying to translate some kind of new multilateralism, international multilateralism that is pragmatic. So, for example, the 4P is a good example there, and it is ready to work with other groups or other coalitions to try. I mean, trying already to push things further. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Moussa Faki. I would like to give the floor to Mark Attashahir from the European Commission. We need to redefine aid, redefine solidarity, redefine the narrative about the European Union and the Commission and Europe, generally speaking, is the first purveyor. So I will give the floor to its representative, Marietta. I am going to speak English, if you will allow me.
I agree that international development finance architecture needs really to adapt to today's challenges. I'm not going to tell you about the investment gap of 4 trillions per year, and as said before, the public money will never be enough. I'm very proud that I can say on behalf of the EU, together with the member states, we continue to be on the front line, especially as a leading donor, accounting on 42% of the global ODA. But we agree that we need to do the changes, and we've been calling for alignment of ODA and TOSD for a long time. So I'm very happy that, and I continue to encourage all initiatives to reinforce the investment in finance dimension of development cooperation. You all know our global gateway strategy, so it's completely in line. So basically, we would like to put more emphasis on investment-oriented development finance and catalytic role of ODA, basically through the innovative and also inclusive partnerships. And of course, we support a renewed and forward-looking narrative around ODA. And of course, alongside with the comprehensive reform, but we really need to do everything to avoid the duplications. I mean, clearly the TOSD framework is essential tool to monitor mobilizing all form of financial instruments, and we've been leading that work for quite some time. And also, I would like to say that we use TOSD figures to calculate the number of resources mobilized by institutions and EU member states in support of Global Gateway. You probably heard about Global Gateway Forum, where our president announced that we basically surpassed the target of 300 billion, so 306 billion been mobilized. And of course, we will continue to support ODA as a modality in certain very vulnerable and fragile contexts. But of course, investment type interventions can often be more impactful and can crowd in the private sector. So let me conclude. We are going to partner with all of you in the framework of the Global Gateway Strategy. And I will again conclude by saying that we are very proud as the Commission, because in these times of, I would say, slowdown in ODA, we proposed to our Council and the Parliament basically ambitious proposal for the external chapter of the multi-annual financial framework 28-34. And of course, we proposed budget of 200 billion. Basically, that means a nominal increase of 74% compared to the current MFF. And in addition, there is 100 billion for Ukraine that comes from the headroom. So here, you know, we will continue to play our role, and hopefully we will have a support and partnership of all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marketa. Now I would like to turn to what I would call the practitioners on the ground. We have heard about them, the multilateral development banks, but now I will give the floor to Carlo Monticelli. Carlo, you are governor of the Council of Europe Development Bank, but this year also you are the head of MDBs, and I've heard that MDBs are doing better both individually and better as a system. So please, Carlo.
Thank you. You set very clearly the rules of the game. One challenge, one solution, 2 minutes. I will try to respect the three of them, contrary to what has happened so far. Now, the challenge, only one, it's the big one. There are not enough resources, and they are not going to increase. So the solution is to try and make the most of what is available. In general, making sure that we increase impact for the resources available to MDBs, make them give better result. One way to do it is to have the MDBs working more effectively together as a system. This has been in the discourse for very long. Now it is starting to happen. And mind you, it is not going to happen for grandiose reforms that sound magnificent about the reform of the global fund, but with the nitty-gritty of delivering better results. And then now I would like to go quickly to the list of the results that the group has already achieved. First, the lending capacity has been increased with a better use of existing capital. There is a very technical agenda of capital adequacy framework. I could spend a lot of time describing it. I won't, but I want to make the point 650 billion more that have been obtained in 10 years to that. To step up efforts to mobilize private capital for development. And there are, again, a long list of detailed measures. De-risking, GEM, the signature of new rely agreements that reduce the burden of borrowers and accelerate co-financing. Expanded support for country-led platforms that align partners around shared development strategies. Enhance measurement of impact, just to make sure that we are really doing the most. More work on local currency financing and foreign exchange hedging. Long list of achievement. More is to be done, but with precise on-the-ground solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlo. And almost done on respecting the rules. But we all know that we have rules. And as we say in French, il y a toujours une règle, mais des exceptions. Tous ceux qui aiment la grammaire française.
Wherever there are rules, there are exceptions. And all those who know about the French language, there are rules, but there always are exceptions. Now, I'm going to give the floor to Luis Jimenez of the Inter-American Development Bank. And I think the Inter-American Development Bank has much to say about it.
Just in my end as well, I would mention, yes, the innovations are really, I think, what bring us around the table here together, and in order to work together on some of these issues. And just to start off with two figures, LAC loses 1.2 million every hour due to natural disasters, natural hazards. I think we not only look at what just happened in Jamaica and what is happening with Hurricane Melissa to see the devastation of what that can cause and the increasing effects of that. And the second thing I would mention in terms of a statistic is that the region must invest at least 2.2 trillion in infrastructure in order to achieve the SDGs. The Inter-American Development Bank is the largest development financier in the region, and we did about 23 billion in lending in 2024. Just for the infrastructure, this is a little bit over 1% of what is needed in infrastructure, let alone the other needs that the region has in terms of social, education, health, and the like. I mean, so this just to give a perspective. So I think the challenge for us is really how do we get how do we use the public sector funds we have more wisely? And I think we've heard the very startling ODA figures. You know, in one sense, Latin America has, I wouldn't call it an advantage, but a situation that because it is full of middle-income countries for the most part, it did not receive that amount of ODA that was seen in other regions, nor that dependence in ODA. And I don't want to call that an advantage because, Madame Espinosa mentioned the inequality in the region, so I do think the needs are there. And the second aspect would be how to unlock that private sector because of those figures in terms of what's required and what's needed. So I wanted to give two of the innovations examples. I think debt swaps have been mentioned, the bonds have been mentioned. We've touched upon, but I wanted to go into a little bit more detail given what's happening or what we've seen happening in the Caribbean with regards to the climate resilient debt clauses. I think, if we want to go to the multilateral, I think commend Spain really for the financing for development conference. As somebody said, we needed a win. And I think we have wins there. And I think climate resilient debt clauses really to pause, countries, they're already suffering through a crisis. They don't need to have another one added up on top of it. So how do we work with countries on that? And I do think we have a very good track record of countries in the region working on climate resilient debt clauses. The second aspect is really the private sector and how to unlock that private finance. And I think, as a bank group, I mentioned the 23 billion, and 44% of that for us was through our private sector arms in the group. So that was IDB Invest and IDB Lab. And I think it's a reflection of what is happening in Latin America and the Caribbean. The idea is that we will be 50-50 by 2030. And I think we are well projected to be 50% on the bank side and 50% on the private sector side in terms of IDB Invest and IDB Lab in lending to private sector. And here the innovation I would want to mention is FX Edge. And I think one of the reasons or one of the situations we have where private capital is not unlocked as much as it should be is exchange currency volatility. And this is a facility in order to work specifically with countries in how we can sort of, prepare projects, but also work with them in how to unlock funds when there are extreme variations in exchange rates so that investments are protected, so there is that ability to repay and move forward. In closing, and just to mention another aspect of the news, we have COP20 in Brazil. We're very proud that that's going to be in our region as well, and I think Brazil did an excellent job with the G20, and we're expecting other countries as well to work for an excellent result in COP. And the other aspect in the news I would mention is, critical raw materials, which is in the news all the time. And I think, again, just to finish with that, LAC has 60% of the world's lithium, 40% of the copper and silver, and obviously significant resources of nickel, bauxite, and rare elements. And I think the question is how we can work with countries in order that this be done sustainably and responsibly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis. Je vais maintenant donner la parole à notre
I'm now going to give the floor to our third representative of multilateral and development banks who is here at our table, and I'm going to give the floor to Martin Reiser. And I would like to ask Martin how the World Bank Group can help us to unlock potential and unlock jobs, unlock whatever it is to forward things.
Thank you very much. I think the two challenges that I was going to mention have all been mentioned. Declining ODA resources, that means we need more leverage, and increasing fragmentation of aid, which means we need more partnerships. I'm going to start with the second because I think less has been said around this, and then I'll answer your question. So we see the size of the average ODA commitment has declined by 40% over the past decade. In the meantime, the number of agencies involved in ODA has more than tripled to over 600. And the average recipient of ODA may be dealing with up to 200 different counterparts. I think it's incumbent on us that we use this as an urgent call to improve partnerships, and we are, as others have already mentioned, already some way down to improving this among the MDBs, but I think there's more work to do. I have some concerns that discussions over benefiting aid or aid as investment could make that more difficult, and I think we need to be careful that we keep the work of the MDBs well aligned in this regard. Now to your question on mobilizing resources. resources. I'm pleased to say that as a World Bank group, we are now at 50-50. MIGA and IFC have dramatically increased their business volume, and so last year we reached 120 billion globally, of which around half was IFC and MIGA. But importantly, even for the poor countries where it is more difficult to mobilize capital, MDBs are leverage in itself. A dollar into IDA is leveraged up to 3.5 to 4 times. A dollar into IBRD can be leveraged up to 10 times. And we have found imaginative and innovative ways of mobilizing that capital, for example, through hybrid capital that can count as an investment. If that is possible for a lot of constrained fiscal budgets, it may be possible to make a capital contribution to an MDB, but have it count as an asset on your balance sheet, i.e. below the line, and not as part of an expenditure. This is just one example. But there are many others under discussion, including in the private sector investment lab, foreign exchange hedging. I'll just mention one in closing, given that my time is already up. But IFC just launched the first securitization of its investment portfolio to bring capital markets into the development investment space. This, together with IFC's commitment to increase the equity share of its portfolio to 30% from a little over 20% today, I think are ways to address what our colleague Khaled Igwe so correctly mentioned, that we need not just more debt, we need principally more investment in equity. And so this is the direction in which we're working. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Now I would like to switch from multilaterals to bilaterals. We have heard that we have to work as a system, multilaterals, bilaterals, national public banks, and we have 3 people that will take the floor on this part. I would first ask Alice Albright, the former CEO of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Alice, if you can tell us what is the main challenge, what is your solution? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for including me. So I agree very much with what many people have said about needing to change the way that we think about ODA, about the system, diversifying resources, changing the business model, deepening capital markets. So I would very much endorse all of that. I would add a couple of things. I think that the whole question of efficiency and cost is going to become more and more important, particularly with ODA shrinking, and that's going to have to be one very important aspect of how we think about what the future looks like. I've since, having left government in January, started doing some work with philanthropies. I loved going to Seville, but one of the things out of the compromiso that has been recognized by philanthropy is that they were only mentioned barely once in the compromiso. Heartfelt, but barely only once. And there's some real enthusiasm coming from the philanthropies to play an important role. I think generally speaking, they realize, and I speak in generalities, that they're not going to be looking to step into the shoes of ODA, not only because the numbers don't work, but also because the nature of the resource that they have is actually quite different. And I think that's a really important opportunity. ODA, as we've seen, is very politically tied. We've seen that the hard way over the past 6 to 9 months. It's also budgeted in a particularly annual way. But philanthropy is quite different. It can be very long-term. It can be very innovative. It speaks to a different set of mandates, and it can operate differently. So I think you'll see going forward some really interesting ideas coming from philanthropy. It will not be the size of ODA, but I think that it represents, I think, a very small contribution, an important contribution to the notion of diversifying resources that are available for the overall approach to how do we finance development. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much, Alice. Now, I would like to say that, well, in Europe, I think you know you are in the most important city of Europe. You are in Paris. But listening to the discussion, and I must say I'm a little biased on that, I think Madrid is also a very important city. And that because we have heard about El Compromiso de Sevilla, which is pas vraiment le compromis, plutôt l'engagement, notre engagement à aller plus loin dans l'avenir. And that's why, dear Anton Leis Garcia from ICID, the Spanish Cooperation Agency, well, Paris remains very important, but Madrid and Sevilla also. So please, Anton.
Thank you very much, and I very much agree because I spent most of my adult life in this city. But Madrid is indeed very important. Sevilla most important because it's not a compromise; it is a commitment, and it's a commitment that has a set of principles. It is a win, but it has concrete means of implementation. These 130 initiatives that Maria Fernanda was mentioning. 3 messages from me. I think we need to focus on not just beyond ODA. We need to focus on ODA too, and that is why we need to reform it. We need to make sure part of the problem with ODA that has become so successful that we try to fix every problem in the world with ODA. It's just too many problems in the world for the little amount of money that we have. So we need to use it much more smartly. We need to unlock other flows. Taxes have been mentioned, domestic resource mobilization seriously, and that is not just, and also the question of the investment in the private sector. TOSDI is indeed a very promising avenue. I don't think it exhausts all possibilities because, as Moussa Faki mentioned, there are also barriers to investment. And with, it's too much to ask from ODA to, leverage all those private funds if those barriers still exist. And climate risk and what is happening with Melissa is a clear example. We are also a humanitarian agency. We need to have a system that does not resolve climate risks with humanitarian assistance that is very expensive. There is climate risk insurance, there is debt suspension clauses that we advocated in Sevilla. So, second message, I think this is not about changing narratives. I think it's about making changes in development cooperation. It's not about the cuts only. I think the system was running out of steam. We really not just explain things differently. By the way, the public opinion is still with us. There is no country in which there has been a significant erosion in the support for aid. So there is something wrong with the politics, but the people are still with us. If we do certain things, we change the why we do it. And we, in Sevilla, our president spoke a lot about investing in global solidarity. So let's continue talking about solidarity and investment. And I would argue that even humanitarian aid is a form of investment as well. Second, on the what. There is poverty and inequality on one basket. I think there is global public goods in another basket, and there is the humanitarian element in a third basket. I think playing with those 3 baskets, I think we can really see what we should be trying to cover. And the how, and this is very important, more horizontal, listening much more, and those of us that work a lot in middle-income countries, I often say, if you want to look at the future of development cooperation, look at Latin America. There is maybe not that many flows or not that much flow in terms of the amount of money, but there is a lot of knowledge. And let's look at what is happening with South-to-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. A lot is happening there, and I'm not sure we are capturing. Certainly it's not being captured by ODA by definition. And less fragmentation, please. All of us, let's don't come up with the latest small little idea or fund or initiative. We need transformational change. We need to come together, coordinate much more, and do not come, again, with a new pet project. Third point, it's good to talk about the broader system and the compromiso and the implementation. But I think it's also very important that we look at the specific sectors. And I think maybe stay tuned. I think global health is probably the most successful example of development outcomes over the last 20, 30 years. It is suffering massive cuts. And probably this is a sector where we can see reform coming up. Spain is working with a number of countries on this. And I think I ran out of time, only 20 seconds over the 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Anton. Perhaps you're right when talking about South-to-South cooperation, triangular cooperation. I just me think that it is captured by TOSDI, among other things. So we are moving in the right direction, if I may say so. And now I would like to turn to Hélène Joufelkit from the AFD, Agence Française de Développement. Well, another acronym, it's FIX, Finance in Common. I think AFD has been doing that, putting people around the table, working across the board, from national public banks to multilaterals through bilateral, and also with a strong focus on sustainable and climate. So, Hélène, over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to say that when it comes to the challenges we're facing, we need to take solidarity as an investment, not as a burden. Solidarity is an investment, not a burden, and this is something that we need to keep in mind, especially now in this context. And my second point is that when it comes to financing development, we cannot oppose that concept to financing climate, because many of the issues we need to cover are related to the climate. We have mentioned that we'll need many more investments by 2030, and we know that 60% will be related to the impact of climate change. So we need to think of this as a whole. Now, the big challenge with us, with these increasing needs in financing, is that we need to change the narrative, and this is something that I've heard in the room, and we also need to make sure that we can amplify the flows that need to go to development and climate-related issues. This has been said a number of times, and it is very important to us to make sure that ODA is well-defined and well understood, and it is necessary for donor countries to invest more into more countries. These countries need to receive more funds, especially in the context of a TOS-D. These countries need more funds. ODA only stands for 3% of all needs in financing. Then there are other sources, as we know. So these are two pillars, these are 2 points I wanted to tackle. Then I think we also need to work on the quality and the alignment of all these flows. They need to be more efficient. We need to work on the efficacy of these funds. And then we have metrics, we have indicators, and we need to make sure that other flows are part of policy. This is my second point. My third point is about governance. I think it is essential for us to have renewed governance and have funds that are aligned on the priorities in each country. And we need dialogue between donor countries and receiving countries. The dialogue is essential. So we've got this DAC reform coming, and France supports it. And development banks are also essential to us because they work on a national level as well. They can work in their ecosystem, they can work on local ecosystems as well, and they use 10% of the financial assets in the world. So the financial common is a place and a space where we can talk about our imperatives and our needs. So I think this is a way this is a space we can use to implement the commitment that was taken in Seville. Thank you very much, Hélène, for insisting on the importance of all these stakeholders and for telling us about the role of national banks and development banks. Now, I would like to also give the floor to other stakeholders. I would like to talk to philanthropists and also to civil society representative Beatrice Nere from the point of view of foundations. We also need you foundations to keep going. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation remains very committed. Mr. Gates said this year that it would still be standing for 20 years, but then there will be an end. The foundation will close in 2045 because this is not a foundation that was created to remain forever, but it will try and do as much as possible before it closes. And we do hope that systems will have evolved by then. And we do hope that there will be new ideas from new generations. And we do hope that there will be more good news for international solidarity. We know that this will remain a fundamental value that we want to see happen between people. I have 4 different points to cover here. Now, of course, a lot has been said. Many very good points have been made, and more eloquently and maybe with better statistics and figures, but I have 4 points. First, the very principle of ODA is attacked, whether we're using the right word when we talk about ODA or not. Given these attacks, I think we need more visibility. The question we really need to ask ourselves is it useful? Is it fair? Is it working? Can we explain the impact of ODA, and can we advocate for ODA? And if we can't explain ODA to our children, if we can't define it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Of course it exists, but we are not helping ourselves by not defining ODA properly, and then it leads to a lot of confusion. Second, I'd like to say about this unlock private financing idea. It's wonderful, but can we all agree that €1 in public funds is not the equivalent of €1 in private funds? Because of governance, private funds don't go where public funds can go. I know we know all of that, but we talk about big figures, we talk about possible projects and impacts, but I don't think a lot of this is going to happen. My third point is we've talked about allocation, we've talked about multi-vulnerabilities, but given the budget cuts we've witnessed, this year has been the first one in 200 years where child mortality has increased. We are going through an emergency situation. We need triage. We need to make choices. And we need more impactful ideas. And sure, this is the goal. We need more impact, but we need to know how. And there are needs that we need to meet. Now, you know what the foundation does. We are working on child and mother mortality in the poorest countries, because we do believe that this is the first thing we need to do if we then want to have the human capital we need to then provide education, and then only can we work on development and economic impact. I have 2 other points, and I know that I'm already behind. We all agree that our action is too fragmented, but next time during the panel, who will be in charge of consolidating this idea? But this is a very open question, because do we all agree that Spain and France can agree to say that ODA happens here or within European countries or at EU level? I mean, we all have the same priorities. We all want the same. We want to achieve the same things. We want to prioritize women's rights, for example. We all stand by the same values, and the EU as well. And so that was my third point. And my fourth point was about all these new instruments that we've been talking about and that we may need. There are so many people here that can propose new instruments, and France has known for 10 or 20 years that we have access to innovative tools and financial sources, but they are not going to international solidarity anymore. And solidarity used to protect these flows, but now, of course, we could develop new tools. We could go further, and the Finance Open Lab does create solutions, incredible ones, actually. But I'm really wondering about, you know, we agree on everything. Can we take risks together? If we take too many risks, then people will think we're crazy. But we really need to find something to do that is in our power, but that is also daring in a way. And we need to show that we're here and that we're actively doing. I'm really sorry I'm not talking in diplomatic terms here, but thank you very much for your patience and for your attention. Thank you very much, Beatrice. It's absolutely fine. We do need people like you who say the truth, and I would love to answer you. We need this visibility. We need to be clear in the way we think and see things. When we talk about private versus public funds, we haven't talked about the levers. We need to be as impactful as possible. We need to find as many levers as possible. And Consolidation, you've mentioned that. What we're aiming at is maybe not fusion, because that would be impossible and very hard to at least do, but the mutual reliance agreement or initiative that you mentioned could actually make it possible to simplify what we do and make it easier for those who benefit from action to actually benefit from it. Now, maybe we need great ideas, but we also need to deliver. Maybe we need great ideas and great ways to deliver, but I just wanted to answer you. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Frédéric Roda. Frédéric Roda, you have been active in many different organizations, and you are now at Global Citizen. So could you maybe tell us about your experience, your challenges, and maybe your solutions? Thank you very much. I really like French, but I think I'm going to express myself in English now.
Try to be quick because I would love to hear some questions from the audience. I think in terms of the challenge that I have to choose, what I would say is that we do need more financial resources, and not just any. We do need more direct resources, debt-free financing, grant financing, whatever you want to call it. Because while I fully agree with all the solutions that have been presented here, first of all, and Bea mentioned it, some of the things that we care about, where we have international objectives in the SDGs and so on, won't be financed through the mechanisms mentioned. And also a lot of the mechanisms mentioned actually do need some injection of grant financing. And actually 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago, we had this discussion here in Paris with the financing summit, and President Macron said we need a concessional shock. And this was 2.5 years ago, and I think that unfortunately the world hasn't necessarily gone into the right direction since then. So I think this is even more true than it was 2 years ago. So my solution, without much of a surprise, is internationally coordinated solidarity taxes. Chanty, you said I've had a previous life in civil society, but the task force that I'm serving is actually a government initiative led by France, Kenya and Barbados, and I should also mention Spain, very, very active, and part of the 4P that Moussa Faki already spoke about. This idea has been around. It's actually not as revolutionary as it sounds. I think the most important thing is now to make it work at scale. Here, again, Moussa Faki already mentioned it, we will have a major announcement next week with a coalition of the willing going ahead in putting a small levy on premium flyers, which are the flyers, I think a lot of you in the room might actually be part of them, that are the most polluting ones. You know also that aviation, especially international flights, the kerosene for international flights goes untaxed. And so there is definitely a case in putting a small levy on business, first class, and private jets. This can bring in precious debt-free financing. It's actually also domestic resource mobilization, because many countries in the coalition are actually low-income countries and small island developing nations. But it's also a way of growing the pot, complementing ODA, because the advanced economies who are part of the coalition will agree to use parts of the funds to invest into resilience measures, both to climate change, but also pandemics, other development shocks in countries that need the financing more. So this is happening, very concrete solution, and I hope a lot of you will rally around this. And just to end on this, I think TOSTI is a really interesting initiative, and actually I should say, Julia, I'd love to discuss it more, because I think it will be very important once this kicks off to actually make the flows that come from solidarity taxes visible and show that they're having an impact. So I think this is probably something we can work on together. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Et maintenant, je voudrais passer la parole à notre dernier speaker autour de la table, qui est Sébastien Treyer.
Thank you so much. I'd like to give the floor now to Sébastien Treyer, who's in charge of the IDDRI. Sebastian, I've heard the words climate, biodiversity, ecosystem services, development and sustainable development. Can we keep that as a priority? What do you think?
Sorry, I had planned my speech in English, so I will answer in English. And I definitely concur with Hélène Jouffel-Kietz from AFD saying that we shouldn't oppose development and climate. And in particular, I believe that investing in renewables, for instance, is really a key challenge for both development and climate. And my main challenge that I see in that area, to complement a little bit what I've heard before, is the idea that the problem that I see is the massive transformation of the world economy with digital and AI, but also with the electrification and the low cost of renewables by China, produced by China. That is both an opportunity for southern countries to access power for their own industrialization, but it also risks to focus EU, China, and the US on pure economic competition and conflicts to capture resources, capture markets, capture technological dominance. And this is really a risk for southern countries to be even more excluded from value chains at the very moment where they need to climb up the value chains. So two things that I think needs to be not as a substitute to ODA and concessionality, but two elements that are extremely important. First, focusing not just on public financial flows, but also on the investment and value chains types of institutional arrangements and agreements. Who will set the rules and standards on investments for these flows to flow in the right direction towards sustainable development, and I insist on being sustainable and development, and towards least developed countries, low-income countries. This is something that the flows are not in the right direction. This was already said. There is a lot to be done on standards and also on the types of investment agreements or investment facilitation agreements that are there. And the European Commission is also already trying to invent new things like the clean trade and investment partnerships. So it's not to say that this is exactly the only thing we need to do, but a plurilateral and not just a bilateral discussion on investment agreements is particularly needed. Last point, it's about how we discuss that solidarity is an investment. I believe in the framework that I'm presenting, that China is revolutionizing the industries all over the world and the supply chains all over the world. Speaking at least to the European citizens, you could say that solidarity investments in third countries, these public financial flows to third countries like Africa, are really an investment for economic security for Europe. Economic security meaning investing in industrial partnerships with these countries to secure structural allies, but also to secure that we can have access to these rapidly emerging markets. Also, that these industrial partners are going to be key, not just for supplying raw materials, but because they are part of the innovation system that we need to share with them. And finally, this is really also very important for Europe as a way to co-define with China and Asian economies the rules of the games of tomorrow, and not just to let these rules be defined by China. So this is really a strategic argument that I suggest we could use for European citizens.
Merci Sébastien, tu nous as ouvert des perspectives très, très larges.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I didn't know we would be on time. Everyone said 22 people on this panel. I mean, what is this? Is this 3 panels put together? I would disagree because this has gone very well. So now if somebody would like to ask a question in the audience, please do so. It might launch a debate and then we'll conclude. Over there, please.
Puis-je dire la solution, investissez dans les femmes?
Please invest in women. 50% of the global population. Invest in women, and you'll see the difference. I'm Patricia Illa. I am an international lawyer, and I would like to say, please invest in women. Use the peace and security resolution, the 1325 resolution that was done in 2015 and hasn't been implemented yet. Please invest in women and you'll get peace in the world. Implement and the general recommendation 40 that says that parity by 2050 should be achieved 50-50. Invest in this, invest in the implementation of the 1325 peace and security resolution, and then you'll find peace in the world and security. Thank you very much for your input. I think you are right. I think we haven't said the word gender, we haven't said the word women, and that might be an issue. Last week, we were at the Feminist Diplomacy of Feminist Foreign Policy conference here in Paris, and you are here today, and thank you for your input here on that topic. Now, it is going to be very hard for me to conclude by summing it up, but I would like to use a few keywords in French and in English to conclude. But it's only a starting point now. I've got measurement matters. We need to co-create. We need to be strategic, transparent, and we need to focus on the most vulnerable. We need to focus on local capital. We need to use the catalyzing power of multilateral, bilateral, and national development banks. Money, but everything else, governments, framework, solidarity is an investment. Women, try to make the most of what is available. Do not focus on big theoretical systems, but deliver better results. Unlock the private sector, leverage, be smart in use of ODA, Toasty, do not forget about climate risks. Investment in solidarity is an investment. I hope that's enough. It is not a perfect conclusion, but I wanted to finish now 5 minutes ahead of time. Thank you so much.